It's great to be with all of you. The energy in this room, hearing about some of your businesses was really, really exciting. Brian Sealander, who is with me right here, has been here all day. He'll be here tomorrow and is just totally pumped up about the whole thing. And the two of us want to bring you, every one of you, to Delaware. And to the extent that you want to talk about what Delaware has to offer, Brian is the guy to talk to. Margaret talked a little bit about my business background before being governor, which is obviously a great job. The most exciting part of my background, I was employee number 13 at Nat'l, and I was there for 6.5 years. We grew from 13 to 3,000 in 6.5 years, which was really an amazing run. Really not that amazing considering some of the successes you all have had. But what it really means now in my role as governor, I'm just totally focused on what we can do to make Delaware the startup state. And when I think about, this being football season, and I've got a couple of kids, and I'm in schools a lot, and I hear kids talk a lot about their heroes out on the football field. And I tell you, one of the things that we have got to do as a country is we have got to convince kids that there are other role models besides athletes and besides rock stars, as much as I would like to be one myself. But if they could see what kinds of, first of all, really interesting businesses you all start up, the kinds of success that you often have, and the journey that you take, and how that in itself is just incredibly exciting, we would be a whole lot better off as a state. People often ask me for the biggest differences between the private sector and the business world, and there are several. But for me, the number one biggest difference is the different attitude toward failure. In your business, you have to try things. You've got to take risks, and sometimes those risks are not going to pay off. But if you're in business and you're not figuring out a new distribution channel, a new product enhancement, a way to take cost out, your competitors will. And unfortunately, the incentive system in government obviously is too often exactly contrary to that. All the incentives are not to take any risks at all, because if you take a risk, you could read about it in the paper the next day. The state auditor could do a report about it. If you're an elected official, your next opponent could use it against you in a campaign. And so one of the biggest challenges for all of us in government is to try to encourage the people in our states to actually learn to take risks. They've got to be smart risks because we're using the taxpayers' money here, but to take some risks. But what I'd like to do, rather than a lot more of my talking at you, I am also the chairman of the National Governors Association. So governors around the country have this association. The chairmanship changes every year. It's a one-year term. And I don't have real long up here, but I would love to hear from you right now about things that you think governments could be doing to make it, to facilitate your success. When you think about it, that's really what a governor's job has to be these days, is to facilitate the success of the businesses in our states. I've probably visited 750 businesses since I took office, and when I do, I ask one question every time: what can we do to make you more successful? Because that's our role. So I'm just going to throw it wide open, and the best ideas that you give me, I'm going to keep in Delaware, and the others I'll share with my other governors across the country. So if any, yes.
Yannick Silver, Maverick 1000. I have more of an idea, I guess, and it's based on the crowdfunding platform that we just saw. And I'd love to see really going back to government by the people, for the people. And there's so many civic projects and things that are underway where we don't know exactly where the money goes, where our taxes go. It'd be great to put crowdfunding to work via our tax money. So we put in X amount of money. Here's the main projects that we're working on. You get to vote where it goes. And that's how we get to actually see the results happen.
Interesting idea. I might share that with my other governors, but and of course, what I would argue is that that's essential. When you're electing, whether it's your legislators or when you're electing governors and the like, what you're electing is their judgment to decide how to invest the taxpayers' money. Well, we don't have a perfect democracy in this country, and most states are not a perfect democracy either. California probably being the closest one, and it's the one that I would argue is the most impossible to govern because of the referendum system. And so what I think we do need to do as a country and certainly as states is we need to be just incredibly transparent about where money is being spent. And so one of the things that we've done in Delaware is we've literally put the state's checkbook online. So you can drill in to see exactly where the money is being spent. But in terms of, sort of leaving all those spending decisions up to it is an interesting idea, one we will think about, but I appreciate the suggestion. Thank you.
I have the microphone. I'm going to add one thing. I
Yeah.
think, in your office, you have an incredible power to shine the spotlight on the importance of entrepreneurs, and I think that really helps it get into the mainstream consciousness and institutionalize it across all parts of the ecosystem.
There is no question, and which is why we would love to shine our spotlight on each of you when you come to our state. And I can promise you that we'll do exactly that. But you're right, and I think, and it really gets back to the comment I made a few minutes ago about kids. If you want kids to sort of recognize that there are other role models, you got to make sure you're spending time telling them who those role models are. And I think it is, the great thing is when even the few conversations I had when I came in, learning about some of your businesses, these are great things to highlight, and of course, there's so much energy behind them, but I agree with that.
Hi, how are you? I'm Christy. I'm with the National Association for the Self-Employed, but I'm also a business owner. My husband and I recently started a gourmet popcorn company here in DC. And so as a business owner and also the president of an association that helps the smallest businesses out there, one thing I know and also hear is particularly infrastructure and systems in states for business owners when they're trying to deal with complying with a series of regulations and rules that apply to them. It's so important for states to have a clear and advanced and efficient system so that business owners can comply. A perfect example for me is trying to deal with Virginia state sales tax, and the online system is so complicated, hard for me to understand. It's hard for me to get help. I have to wait on the phone for hours till I get, someone will speak to me, and even then, they tend to pass me off to somebody else. So I can't emphasize enough, especially for the smallest entrepreneurs out there who are CEO, CFO, head of everything in their business, that we have some great infrastructure and systems in the states to help them comply with everything you're asking them to do.
A great point. First of all, just so you know, there is no sales tax in Delaware, so you would not, all those hours that you spent, on the phone trying to deal with that, see, if you were in our state, you would have been focused on gaining more customers. And of course, I'm not joking, but what we have to recognize is that all of you ought to be spending your time building a business and not worrying about how you navigate the state bureaucracy, or for that matter, the city bureaucracy, or the county bureaucracy. And one thing that we've got to do better in all of our states, including my state, is recognize that we need a coherent system across all levels of government, so that you're like having to spend hardly any time at all trying to navigate it, and instead you ought to be spending time building your business. Couldn't agree more.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Speaking of bureaucracy, I am from California, and I'm Mike Ruster, with the director of the Business and Entrepreneurship Center program that's run through the California Community College system. And my question is a big one, based on your comments. How would you, if you were governor of California, what would you, because it is a mess, and so what would you do? The top 3 things that you think could be done to help the business climate in California?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would ask the California businesses what are the first 3 things that they would want done. Because and that sounds like I'm punting, but I'm not punting, because I said earlier I've visited 750 businesses across Delaware to ask one question, which is, what can we do to make you successful? Now, I can tell you what they tell me in Delaware, and the answer could be different, it may not be different in California. What they tell me is actually it's not 3 things, it's about 6 things. The first thing they say is you've got to make sure the schools are absolutely world-class, because we know the only way we can be successful long-term is by having great schools. One, we're going to want to recruit great talent. The only way we're going to be able to recruit great talent is if you have great schools. And secondly, we may have kids of our own, and we want them to go to great schools. That's number 1. Number 2, and connected with it, is the quality of the workforce. And there are probably almost every state in the country has gone through a transition. Workers have gone through a transition where the jobs they did 20 years ago are no longer available. They want to keep working, and we've got to have a smart, effective, and cost-effective system to make sure that we can teach people the job skills that are actually going to be valued in the marketplace. So community colleges, by the way, are like, that's front and center for that. Third, businesses want to be in places where the taxes are reasonable and where the cost of doing business is reasonable. And I think to the extent that any of you are in states where you don't feel that way, the difference these days is you can walk. Not every business, but most businesses, and especially many of the businesses that you represent, you can go wherever you want to be. You're not stuck to the place where you started. You'd like to stay there, but we have to recognize, people like me have to recognize you've got more choices than you've ever had before. And the CEO of Gallup wrote a book several months ago called The Coming Jobs War. And in it he wrote that there are 3 billion people in the world looking for jobs, and there are only 1.2 billion jobs available. 3 billion people looking, 1.2 billion jobs available. So we are in a global war for jobs, which really means we're in a global war for talent, because the jobs are going to go where the talent is, which is why the workforce piece is important. And the other thing that's important, by the way, is quality of life. So we're actually spending a bunch of money in our state on bike trails and paths and all the stuff that goes with that, because people want to live in places where people want to work in places where they want to live. The other things they tell me, they care about being in a place with great infrastructure. They want to be in places where there's a strong linkage with institutions of higher education. And finally, they want to be in a place with a really responsive government, again, recognizing that if you're filling out forms and waiting in line, you're not putting people to work. So I can't tell you what I do specifically in California. I mean, California, I do think, is one of those really interesting places, because the level of energy, particularly around Silicon Valley, but not just there, is astounding. I mean, every time I go out there, I'm totally inspired by the level of energy, the talent, the enthusiasm. It should be like, and it is, it's one of the best places in the world, to do business. And at the same time, there's so many budget challenges for other reasons. If California is able to figure that out, then I think there's no limit.
My name is Dave Baldwin, and I am president of Aquarian Technology Systems in Ohio, but Michael has asked me to serve as one of the co-chairs of this summit, representing the creative economy. And I wanted to discuss with you, or just make you aware of the power and the impact of the creative economy in the last few years, especially during the recession, that they were a net gainer. Especially in many states, they were phenomenally more a net gainer to the economy. And that the National Governors Association be aware of that, recognize that. As my role here was to include people, like George Stugros, who's the chair of the board of the National Creativity Network, and things that are going on, like in Creative Oklahoma, where they have a Creative Entrepreneurship Cup competition. So the integration of entrepreneurship and the creative economy. And would ask the question here is, to make you aware of that, but also to ask how Empact and Michael and the whole team and all of us in the room can work with the National Governors Association to forward this awareness and this movement.
Well, one, couldn't agree more about the impact and the importance, and then to specifically answer your question, I think that probably the first thing to do would be to have the folks here sit down with the staff of the Economic Development Committee at NGA, and then we can sort of figure out where to take it from there, but I appreciate the comment. I'm not picking anybody else. I'll let...
Hey, how's it going? My name's Scott Bailey. I help run an organization called Mash Challenge. It's a $1 million competition for early stage companies, and we're based in Boston, but one of the earliest supporters was Deval Patrick, who was pretty instrumental in helping get it off the ground. And I think one of the things that he does really well is show up. And part of that helps drive media and attention, and I think what startups inevitably need is like exposure. Yeah. And so I think governors can serve as a really good resource for that. So
no question, totally agree.
Sylvia.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Scott at the Girls CEO Connection, and you were talking about role models and how to get people like Catherine to let the students know. You might want to use technology like YouTube. There's a lot of interviews, a lot of talk on YouTube about young entrepreneurs from like Biz Kids, she's right there, young kids on up to high school students. We do it for the Girls CEO Connection interviews. You might want to get that in the classrooms, because then they can see their technology and how they do these, learn from the interviews.
Yeah, again, I mean, we certainly understand kids are learning things in ways that we, didn't exist when we were there. So the social media, extremely important. And would love to partner with all of you to figure out creative ways to get the right message out.